first of all, kind of a default hypothesis when scientists don't feel like coming up with a new hypothesis. They'll just default to the null hypothesis. Raise your hand if you've heard the null hypothesis before. Null basically means zero, right? And so what the null hypothesis is, and you can use it with most types of studies, it's just saying that we're going to default to the independent variable doesn't make any difference. If we use the null hypothesis with your COVID pill experiment, it would be that your pill doesn't work, that there will be no difference between the people who took the real pill and the people who took the placebo. So when you read, as you inevitably will, there's lots of studies that do this. When you read it, our study did not provide enough data to reject the null hypothesis. That just means that there wasn't enough of a difference between the control and the experimental group to say that the independent variable made a difference. It's not something I'm really going to make you use. It's just one of those things I want in your vocabulary so you know what it is when you see it. So to segue back into actual biology, which, as you know, is the study of living things, we should probably wind up this chapter with how do you tell? What is it that makes a living thing a living thing? And can we come up with a list of, here are the universal characteristics that make something alive? By universal characteristics, I mean all living things on Earth. It's true of it. See what you can do. Grab a sheet of paper and the people around you. The groups you used for the last group activity we did are fine. Talk it through. See if you can come up with 8 things that all living things share, that make them living things. Can't just be they're made of matter. So is everything else, right? Can't be one of those. So what unique characteristics do all living things share? And I'll give you a hint. It's got to pass the tree test. In other words, if you say living things move, what about a tree? They don't. They get moved by stuff.
The leaves move towards the base of sunlight when they grow.
Visibly?
Not visibly.
Okay, so you got to be specific. If you say all living things eat, that doesn't pass the tree test either. Well, trees make their own food. Well, yeah, but they don't eat. So figure out a way to say it so that it is true of all living things. Got it? All right, you need 8. Give it about 2 weeks and you'll know more.
Yay.
Okay, let's see how you did. What do you got? All living things what, Selene? Oh, that ought to be number 1, don't you think? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, what else? Yeah, but so there's a lot of other stuff that's not alive. You're right. You're not wrong. You learned something in the biochem unit. That's good. But I don't know if we can use that as something that's also true of pencil lead.
They're made of specific cells.
Cells, yeah. And this is one where I have to say every living thing that we have seen, but it's absolutely true of everything that we have seen that's alive is made of cells. Yeah. You're 1/4 of the way there. Eli.
All living things die.
Happy Tuesday. Yeah, you're right. I mean, we're not going to use that as like one of our 8, but it's certainly true. Let's write it to the side. Death. Thank you. Ray of sunshine. Sam?
They needed some sort of way to get energy.
I like it. So you didn't say they eat. You said they need or use energy. Perfect. Perfect. Cool.
Need water.
Yeah, that's true. All life that we know of is kind of water-based. I don't know if it's specific or unique enough to life to use for one of our 8, but we can put it over here. Water. Yeah.
They all grow.
Yeah, all living things grow. I like it. They all start smaller than they're going to be eventually. Wow, halfway there already. Man.
All living things evolve or adapt.
Yeah, 2 different things really. Evolve. I like that. That just says that if I check in on the population of squirrels out in the woods outside this school now and in 10 years, that population will have changed. It'll be different genetically. That's all we mean when we say evolution. Now, what we'll get into in like chapters 16, 17, and 18 is how that evolution happens. But the fact that it happens is one of the defining characteristics of life. Yeah, every population we've ever seen changes over time. Cool.
React to their environment around them.
Ooh, I like that. When she said adapt, that's what I thought of, is every living thing, not evolution is like between generations, right? Certain things die, certain things have babies. But you say reaction to your environment, that covers like what you said about the leaves growing on the trees. That covers that. We don't have to say motion. I like it. We're going to use the word, instead of react, we're going to use the word respond. Any others? You did real good. The 2 that are left aren't ones you would normally think of.
They release energy.
Release energy. Yeah, I guess that's kind of a corollary to using energy. We'd probably put it in that category.
Have nerves.
Nerves. Only the lucky ones. Plenty of living things that don't. Yeah. Trees.
Little like
Not nerves. No, those are tubes for watering food. That'd make being a vegetarian rough. You're a vegetarian because you didn't want to be mean to animals, and you found out that trees had nerves. They all need sunlight. Yeah, that goes with using energy. Yeah, the energy really does kind of all come from the sun. Well, you got enough for that's pretty good. Let's start to kind of write them down in our notes. Ready? Number 1 with a bullet for sure is reproduction, and it doesn't always look the same. You're aware that there is such a thing as asexual reproduction, which requires only one parent. That can be as simple as a cell splitting in 2 after it's copied its DNA, or as complex as an animal growing what's called a bud out of its side. Budding is like if I were to start growing another Mr. Sander out of my shoulder, and it would get bigger and bigger and more complex, and eventually boom, there would be 2 Mr. Sanders. It's terrifying, I know. But that's what it is. And then there is sexual reproduction, which requires 2 parents and has it's certainly energy-wise and complexity-wise, it's much more costly than asexual. Asexual is easier if we're talking in terms of evolutionary benefit. The real benefit that sexual reproduction gives organisms that do it is what?
It's like survival of the fittest. Like the ones that survive have the best genes and they come together and make it better.
Wouldn't that be true of asexual as well?
Most can be the same every single time.
So the real benefit of sexual reproduction is variety. Yeah, diversity. Exactly. If you got more different kinds of things that your progeny can be, then that's more for evolution and natural selection to work with. And so you tend to evolve faster, and absolutely your populations adapt faster. Good. All right. Then you called out metabolism. That's great. That's use of energy. That's just a fancy word for it. You know that word though, right? Like in terms of like, oh my God, he can eat whatever he wants and he never ever gains any weight. I hate him. He has such a high metabolism, right? It means how the rate at which you use energy. One you didn't come up with, which is fine. It kind of goes with cells when you think about it. But every living thing we've ever seen uses DNA as its like informational molecule, as its genetic code that it uses to, well, live, but then also pass on to its offspring. Whether you're just copying it and splitting in two, or scrambling it up and then combining it with somebody else's, that's the stuff that you put into your offspring. And then evolution you came up with? Absolutely. Every population changes genetically. Sexually reproducing populations change faster because they scramble and reshuffle and redeal their DNA into their offspring differently every time. So they create more variations. Things change faster, but mutations cause even asexual populations to evolve. They just evolve slower. Questions so far? Halfway there. See that? Any idea the amount of math, mostly calculus, that you would have to do to program a robot to do what Sam just did? And he did all the math in his head without even knowing he was doing it. Ridiculous. That is an incredibly complex response to one's environment. And like he even, like if you were watching his hand when he did it, he put it in exactly the right place, and then he gave a little bit, like he absorbed a little bit of the shock, calculated the spin correctly so that it'd be flat in his hand. Amazing. It can be as complex as that, or as simple as it grows towards the light, or it wiggles when you poke it, or, you know, the stove is hot, so I pull my hand away. But every living thing in some way can respond. So what do we call the marker flying at Sam's head, or the hot stove, or the poke? What's the technical term for something that causes a response? Nothing? Starts with an S.
Stimulus?
Good. A stimulus is anything that causes a response. Then you came up with cells, and you know, I think already, that living things can be one-celled. All bacteria, many protists, and a few fungi are single-celled, unicellular. And then multicellular, the stuff we're familiar with. Here's the one you might not have heard before. And the best way to start talking about it is to give you an example. I want you to picture one of those days in February, early February, when it's like the high is going to be like 5 degrees. You know those days? When like you're kind of hoping that they call off school because they don't want kids standing out and getting frostbite. One of those days. And I want you to picture me in shorts and a t-shirt walking outside. What happens? Walk me through it. What's the first thing that's going to happen to me when I walk outside? Don't overthink it. What's the first thing that happens?
You're gonna get cold.
I'm going to feel cold. Absolutely. I don't want you to think of that as something, though, that the cold is doing to me. What it really is something that my body is doing to me. My body is sending a message to my brain that says, hey, you should go inside. This doesn't feel good, and I'm going to make it not feel good so that you go inside. That's what your body's doing when you feel cold or hot. It's getting you to change your behavior. What happens next, Anna? Hopefully, but I'm kind of dumb, so I'm not going in. So what happens next?
You shiver?
Yeah, my body takes control of my muscles and makes me look ridiculous in an effort to generate metabolic heat. It makes my muscles all fire off involuntarily, and that actually does create some heat. It's going to be a losing battle, but it's going to try anyway. Absolutely. What else? What other changes am I going to notice as I stay outside in this very cold weather? You like?
Begin to lose feeling in your fingers and toes.
Yeah, you start to feel numb, and that is because your body is basically saying, this guy is not getting the message. I'm a little worried about him actually surviving this. So we don't need fingers or ears or toes or his nose to survive. What we need is brain, heart, lungs, liver, etc. So let's pull the blood from the unimportant stuff in an effort to keep the precious bits inside alive. That's what's happening there. And so on, right? There's various stages to this. What's happening, though, as a whole, we're going to classify this differently than response to environment. We're going to classify this is me as a living thing trying to maintain my inner self when my external environment is trying to screw it up. My external environment is trying to cool me down. I need to stay warm, right? And so I'm doing things, I'm making changes to keep that warmth. And you can apply it to anything. Same thing when it's hot, it's too hot, and I go outside in a winter coat, right? I'm going to start to feel hot, and then I'm going to start to sweat, which is evaporative cooling, right? And eventually I'll stop sweating because my body starts to worry about dehydration. All of that can be classified. You may know the word, the H word, that means trying to keep your insides constant while your outsides are trying to screw you up. It's homeostasis. It's a tough one to define. It's best to just kind of give examples. Your book will say homeostasis is in maintaining an internal balance. I like to use simpler words and say it's basically keeping your insides different from your outsides. And last but not least, everything pretty much starts out smaller, but also often less complex than it's going to be as a mature form. So growth is what we use for increasing in size, and development is the word we use for getting more complex. Those are the big 8. I mean, depending on which book you're looking at, they might call these slightly different things. They might subdivide them into more or less categories. But this is the basics. This is the list that we will use for the characteristics that every living thing has. Questions? All right, folks, that is about it. I'm going to give you sample essays and time to work. And those sample essays will be due Thursday. Your test is Friday. Here we go.